President Trump's 50% tariff on most imported copper products has fueled a surge in copper prices. While the import tax might not increase the production of the metal in the United States, it has led to another domestic spike: copper thefts.
When President Donald Trump announced a 50% tariff on imported copper products under Section 232, he framed it as a matter of national security aimed at China, the world's largest producer of refined copper. Yet the shock was felt most in the U.S. itself. Futures markets plunged, and the price gap between copper traded in the U.S. and London jumped to 31%, the highest ever recorded. Instead of stability, the policy created disruption and volatility. The most immediate impact was not a revival of U.S. copper production, but a rise in costs. Copper prices surged as much as 35% over the past year, according to CBS News, creating an unexpected side effect: a wave of copper thefts across the country. The U.S. National Insurance Crime Bureau estimates that copper theft has become a nearly $2 billion annual problem. From phone lines in California cut repeatedly by thieves to Los Angeles bridges stripped of copper wiring, the consequences have been severe. Local governments are spending millions to repair damages worth only a fraction of what the thieves gained on the black market. For manufacturers, the tariff means higher input costs for appliances, vehicles, and electronics, eroding competitiveness. Instead of reinforcing national security, the tariff has created insecurity at home, straining infrastructure and exposing communities to new risks. The intended shield for U.S. industry has turned into a domestic burden.
Canada produces a good amount of copper, but ships a lot of it off to Asia for processing, and then it goes into the United States. So maybe the impact is more on the U.S. consumer than on Canadian businesses.
Canada was quickly caught in the crossfire, since much of its copper is refined in Asia before entering the U.S. market. But Ottawa has not remained passive. More than 85% of bilateral trade continues tariff-free under CUSMA, giving Canada a base of stability. Prime Minister Mark Carney has pressed for diversification into Europe and Asia, while encouraging a buy Canadian movement at home. Provinces have begun tearing down barriers to interprovincial trade, creating a stronger domestic market. Carney also suspended Canada's digital services tax, worth about $1 billion Canadian dollars annually, to keep negotiations with Washington open. At the same time, Canada continues to hold leverage in energy and critical minerals. By moving deliberately rather than reacting impulsively, Canada has shown it can turn pressure into opportunity. China, the intended target, has also found ways to adapt. The company Wellicent invested early in a factory in Grand Prairie, Texas, which will produce 3,000 tons of copper flat wire a year for clients such as Stellantis. Because production is inside the U.S., it avoids the tariff entirely. With $100 million of additional investment planned, the plant is expected to deliver more than half of the firm's overseas revenue within 3 years. A tariff designed to curb Chinese influence has instead created an opening for a Chinese company to profit on American soil. Globally, the copper market remains unstable. Analysts warn that the collapse in futures prices, combined with weaker demand in China, signals deflationary pressure, with risks spreading far beyond the metals sector. Trump's copper tariff was meant to showcase strength, but its effects tell another story. It has fueled crime and costs at home, pushed allies like Canada to strengthen their independence, and even allowed Chinese firms to find new advantages. Canada has responded with patience and strategy, proving it can defend its interests without losing its leverage. What remains clear is that the tariff has backfired, undermining the very goals it was meant to achieve.
Tourism in Las Vegas is in a big slump this summer, costing the city billions of dollars. Some are saying that could signal trouble ahead for the U.S. economy.
This summer in Las Vegas tells a story that reaches far beyond the bright lights of the Strip. Crowds are smaller, hotel workers are bringing home half the tips they earned last year, and even simple purchases like a drink now leave visitors with sticker shock. The city reported an 11% drop in total visitors in June, according to local officials. For an economy that depends on constant traffic from tourists, that decline means billions of dollars lost. At the heart of this downturn lies a question that is echoing across America. Are President Donald Trump's tariffs and tougher border rules slowly choking the life out of U.S. tourism? The administration has leaned heavily on tariffs as a show of economic power. But those policies, along with stricter immigration enforcement, are now colliding with one of America's most visible industries.
Is Las Vegas dying, or is it all hype?
It is dying, not only with the tourism, but with the pricing. The consumer looks at it and says, man, I'm paying this much for this. I just don't see the value.
Las Vegas has become the clearest warning sign. The mayor has confirmed that the number of Canadian visitors flying into the city has collapsed by 40% so far this year. For a market that once supplied a steady stream of guests, the faucet has indeed slowed to a drip. That drop alone helps explain why casinos, restaurants, and shops are all feeling the squeeze. The pain shows up in everyday paychecks. Restaurant workers who used to earn between $150 and $200 a day in tips now see only $50 to $60. Tourists are still spending, but the crowds are thinner, and higher prices on hotels, meals, and drinks make people think twice about returning. Experts in Nevada are warning that Las Vegas cannot simply charge more to make up the difference. A city that built its reputation on offering value is losing the very appeal that made it unique.
I think since 2006, the number of people coming from the U.S. to Canada is more than the number of people crossing from Canada into the U.S.
The contrast becomes clearer when looking at what is happening across the border. Canada has faced the same tensions, with its citizens cutting back on trips south. Customs and Border Protection data shows 2.4 million land entries from Canada into the United States in July 2025. That was 500,000 fewer than the same month last year. The decline has been sharp enough to hurt duty-free shops along the border. The Frontier Duty-Free Association reports sales in July were still down nearly 37%. One store in New Brunswick even closed its doors after more than 40 years of business. Yet Canada itself is not standing still. For the first time since 2006, outside of the pandemic years, more Americans traveled north than Canadians traveled south. Statistics Canada confirms that in June and July, cross-border flows tilted in Canada's favor. Families, baseball fans, and summer travelers increasingly chose Canadian cities as their destination. Even with some struggles at border towns, Canada has managed to present itself as a stable and welcoming option. In this climate, Prime Minister Mark Carney's message of patience and openness is resonating not just with trade partners, but also with ordinary travelers. The lesson is clear. President Trump's tariffs were meant to project strength, yet their ripple effects are hurting American tourism. From the Strip in Las Vegas to border duty-free shops, the sector is losing visitors, especially Canadians who once came in steady numbers. At the same time, Canada is quietly turning the tide. More Americans are crossing north, and Canada's image as stable and welcoming is paying off. While Trump's approach makes the U.S. look less attractive, Canada gains simply by holding steady. In this contest, resilience is proving stronger than force. The real question is whether America can afford to keep driving travelers away while its neighbor turns caution into opportunity.
Canada's counter tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos will remain in place, but as of September 1st, tariffs on all the U.S. goods that are CUSMA compliant will be removed.
Canada has a lot of cards, their most important customer in critical industries.
In Washington and Ottawa, trade once again defines political power. President Donald Trump is pushing tariff pressure across key sectors, especially metals and autos. Canada has answered with a targeted adjustment. Starting September 1st, Ottawa will remove retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods that comply with the USMCA. Countermeasures on steel, aluminum, and automobiles remain in place. Some read this as a retreat. The better reading is a tactical reset designed to narrow the fight to the sectors that matter most.
Right. And look, the Prime Minister, I think I saw in the news conference, answered the question that because we believe there is an opportunity in the coming weeks to come to a bilateral deal with the United States that will put us in a better position than we're in this evening.
Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc insists Canada is not surrendering leverage. On the contrary, he stresses that Canada still has many cards to play. The reasoning is straightforward. Canada is the single largest customer for American goods in several critical industries. Every day, Canadian imports support U.S. farmers, energy suppliers, and manufacturers. Beyond trade flows, Canadian pension funds hold more than $1 trillion in American assets and could expand those investments by another $100 billion annually. On top of that, Canada's role in energy and minerals cannot be understated. The United States still relies on Canadian oil for nearly 4 million barrels per day and on Canadian uranium for over a quarter of its supply. These are not minor statistics. They are central to North America's economy. By narrowing its counter tariffs, Ottawa is not discarding leverage. It is consolidating around the tools that matter most, the ones Washington cannot easily ignore. This shift has triggered a debate. Critics argue that Canada is giving in too quickly, pointing to earlier concessions on the digital services tax, on defense commitments, and even on border enforcement. They worry that every concession emboldens Trump to ask for more. Yet a growing number of independent voices see it differently. Former finance advisors and political analysts describe the move as a good step, even a necessary one. Their reasoning is anchored in the lived experience of Canadian households and small businesses. Tariffs have raised costs on food, clothing, and basic imports. Removing them eases the squeeze on families already dealing with inflation. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business reported 2 years ago that retaliatory tariffs were hurting medium and small firms the most. Now, many of those same businesses may finally feel some relief. At the same time, the government has taken away an argument Trump often uses that Canada does not respect the very agreement it signed. With an executive order, Washington confirmed that USMCA-compliant goods would remain tariff-free. By aligning with that order, Ottawa strengthens its credibility rather than weakening it. The true test lies in the sectoral tariffs that remain untouched. American duties on steel and aluminum are hitting Quebec and Ontario especially hard, and the auto tariffs are already straining assembly lines. These are the industries where integration across North America is deepest. They are also the areas where Trump's position is toughest. For decades, he has argued that automobiles should be built inside the United States and nowhere else. That belief will make the auto file the most contentious of all. Still, Canada has not walked into the room empty-handed. Its energy exports underpin U.S. electricity grids and refineries. Its minerals are essential for new technologies. Its role in continental supply chains gives it a weight that no executive order can erase. By lifting tariffs on USMCA goods, Carney has lowered tensions at home, reduced costs for consumers, and cleared the table for focused negotiations on the sectors that matter most. Trump remains the dominant figure, but Canada has chosen patience and preparation over escalation. The contest is now set between Trump's pressure politics and Carney's strategic patience. The outcome will shape not only the next stage of U.S.-Canada relations, but the foundation of the North American economy itself.
In the news, Prime Minister Mark Carney, of course, announcing a new $1.2 billion aid package for Canada's softwood lumber industry. Now, the news comes just after the U.S. government announced an increase in anti-dumping duties on the sector, going from 7% to just over 20%.
Billions of dollars a month of softwood lumber now jammed up at 35% tariff.
When President Trump raised tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber to 35% at the start of August, the decision was presented as a bold measure to restore American industry. Yet the reality is more complex. Canadian lumber makes up the majority of wood used in American housing construction, and this is not a product that the U.S. can replace overnight. According to the U.S. Department of Commerce, Canadian softwood lumber has consistently supplied well over 3/4 of U.S. imports during the past decade. Every extra duty imposed raises the cost of building homes, schools, and even furniture. At a moment when mortgage rates remain high, this added burden risks pushing more families out of the housing market. For builders already facing tight margins, the tariff is not just a trade measure, it is a direct hit to the cost of doing business.
Now Canada is lifting some of these retaliatory tariffs, as you know. The government is actually alleviating some of the pressure on the U.S.
Prime Minister Mark Carney chose not to respond in kind across the board. Ottawa removed most retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, while keeping steel, aluminum, and autos protected. Some viewed this as a retreat, but it was in fact a calculated defense. Canada highlighted the true pressure point, softwood lumber. The United States cannot simply cut Canada out of the market because domestic production falls far short of national demand. Alternative suppliers in Europe or South America cannot match Canada's scale or logistical advantage. This reality makes Trump's strategy a gamble that hits his own voters as much as his northern neighbor. For Ottawa, the decision to step back on lesser items while holding the line on critical sectors underscored that Canada is not fighting blindly. It is protecting leverage where it matters most, using economic facts rather than political noise. Domestically, Carney's choice reflects political and economic realities. He leads a minority government, meaning every move is under the microscope of opposition leaders. Critics, including Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, argue that easing tariffs weakens Canada's hand. But Carney's strategy aligns with the advice of premiers and industry leaders. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has already warned that Trump could reopen CUSMA as early as November, 2 years before the scheduled 2026 review. That looming threat makes it vital for Canada to demonstrate stability now. By pursuing progress on softwood lumber, Carney can deliver relief for Canadian forestry communities and reduce costs for U.S. consumers, a win-win that strengthens his position at home. The decision also positions Canada as a responsible actor, willing to de-escalate without sacrificing its core interests. It is an approach that values patience and timing, elements often overlooked in trade battles that dominate headlines. Softwood lumber is not just another trade issue. It has become the symbol of how Canada responds to American pressure. Trump set the stage by raising tariffs, but the structure of North American supply chains limits how far Washington can push. Canada has shown that it can adapt, choosing when to ease tensions and when to defend its most vital industries. Far from capitulation, this is a sign of resilience. By using lumber as the test case, Ottawa has proved it can protect workers, defend national interests, and still present itself as a credible partner. The outcome will shape not only the price of homes across America, but also the credibility of Canada's strategy as it approaches the all-important USMCA review in 2026. In this fight, Canada is not bending. It is showing that leverage, wisely used, is more powerful than tariffs shouted from a podium.